So for any of you that haven't met me before, my name's Jason. I've been running this group for just about 3.5 years now. I'm a real estate agent out of Parksville, specializing in income producing properties, usually residential properties. Yeah, and so I'm glad to see a few new faces and a bunch of regulars. So I'll try to bring as much value as possible today. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the market. It has changed quite drastically in the last 2 months. So it is actually worth talking about this time around. Interest rates have obviously changed quite a bit. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about what that actually means for buying properties. And then Tanis is here today. She's going to do a presentation on short-term rentals, which is a very hot topic. Yeah, I know Andy's been waiting for this one. So we are seeing increasing inventory. More people are listing, which is common in the springtime. But it seems like people are just getting over the whole COVID thing. People are putting their properties up for sale. So we're seeing some more selection, which is meeting some of the demand. People are still thinking the market's climbing and we're in a ridiculously hot market. And some people are pricing their properties very high, hoping to get top dollar. And those properties are sitting now. And I've seen price reductions. I've seen drastic, fast price reductions. I saw a property listed at 800. They quickly dropped it to 700 and then dropped it to 680. And that was within 2 weeks. They started way too high. They were aiming for the clouds, and it just didn't happen, right? So, but that being said, one 2 doors down was listed for 660. I went into multiple offers and got bid up and sold. So well-priced properties are selling. They're still going into multiple offers. Overpriced properties or weird properties are the ones that aren't selling. So I stole this from Kyle Green from Bigger Pockets. He always talks about odd properties in a hot market will always sell. People don't care that the driveway is shared with the neighbor. They're just desperate to get anything. They'll buy the strangest properties with weird floor plans or defects or whatever. But when there's more inventory, when there's more selection, and they can choose to not have a weird house, they'll not have a weird house. So the weird stuff sitting around, the overpriced stuff sitting around, the well-priced stuff is still going pretty quickly. And that's where the opportunity is with those odd properties. If there's a strange floor plan or some sort of deficiency that you can see an easy remedy for, that's where I think we're seeing properties sitting around dropping in price, and it's possible to come in and scoop something that has latent value in it. So I just wanted to kind of touch briefly on how interest rates are affecting properties. So this is actually a real house in Port Alberta that's currently for sale. It's listed for $620,000, but it's been on for about a month. So I'm just saying, realistically, you could pick it up for $600,000 with 20% down and a 2% interest rate. So that's 2% interest rate was 3 months ago, 4 months ago, was what we were seeing. And the quick math I was doing on properties, $600,000 is kind of a fairly common price point for like a BC box house with a suite. So quick math on 600 grand, I found if it generated $3,000 a month of income, you'd be generating some level of cash flow. So then I knew if it was $700,000, you know, it probably would be break even, or you need to get more in rent for it. But that was the benchmark, was $600,000, $3,000 a month income. You should see some level of cash flow. Obviously, that's dependent if you're paying for property management or if you're paying for utilities. Maybe it has really high property tax. Things like that are always variables. But you can see at the bottom here, we've got about $400 a month cash flow from this property with 20% down. Now, fast forward to where interest rates are now, we're at about 4% for a mortgage, even 4.5%. So even though interest rates, the prime rate has only been increased by about 0.75%, banks that are offering the mortgage, they are still expecting interest rates to climb. So they don't want people locking in for 3%. So if you want a locked in rate, they want 4% now. Variable rates are still in the high twos, low threes. So this exact same property, same purchase price, same 20% down with a 4% interest rate. Now we're hemorrhaging $100 a month on cash flow. That's $500 a month loss. We went from $500 or $400 cash flow to $100 a month deficit. So that interest rate is now a deal breaker for a lot of properties. And obviously this is all affecting home buyers as well. Your borrowing power is just limited. If you're trying to borrow $500,000 at a 2% higher interest rate, your money's not going as far, which is one of the primary reasons we're seeing prices stagnate and even coming down now.
People
So
can
just
buy and rent.
flipping around, if you were to pay $500,000 for that exact same property at 4%, we get back to cash flow, but we're not even at the same $400 cash flow we were at before. So you have to pay probably somewhere around $450,000 to get it back to the same performance level it was at when it was a 2% interest rate as far as cash flow goes. So many people have been waiting for the market to come down. Prices are ridiculous. Nothing makes any sense. I'm going to wait until prices come down. Well, prices are coming down. That doesn't mean that the deals are working anymore, because the interest rates are what are causing those prices to come down. So you've just traded one negative for another negative. You've been waiting for prices to come down, but that's just going to cost you in the additional interest rate, right? So it comes back to my whole philosophy of buy for cash flow and nothing else really matters. So I don't know where interest rates are going. I've talked to a fair number of experts. I follow Kyle Green from the Green Mortgage team for anybody that's familiar with him. He thinks that they've done some pretty drastic increases already at 0.75%, which has pushed mortgage rates even higher than that. And we're already seeing the market stall out and now some pretty drastic price reductions. If they continue increasing interest rates another % this year, we could see a huge economic downturn. The whole reason interest rates were low and they were printing so much money was to prevent an economic meltdown, a collapse, a recession. So they don't want a recession. If they keep increasing interest rates and slow the economy down, we are going to see a recession. So that's one train of thought, that they're going to avoid that. And now that they're seeing the market is slowing, the economy is slowing, they're going to stop increasing interest rates. Other people say, no, we're still in a major inflation.
And with that,
they're going to keep increasing those rates. We could be looking at 5.5% to 6% mortgages by the end of the year for fixed terms or fixed rates. So I don't know. I don't have the answer. And you talk to head people at banks and mortgage brokers, and they'll all tell you a different story. The moral of the story is nobody knows. There could be another wave of COVID that shuts businesses down again, and they have to slash interest rates to try to recover it. Or maybe the economy starts booming and inflation continues and they have to keep jacking interest rates. Nobody has that crystal ball. A cheaper house with a higher interest rate has the same cost, right? So if your interest rate's substantially higher, like you saw in the last slide there, it's not cheaper on a monthly payment. Yeah, the purchase price has changed, but your monthly payments are drastically affected by your interest rate. Variable rate mortgages are still quite low. As I mentioned, I think they're in the mid to high 2% range. And so a lot of experts are saying you're better off to go with a variable rate mortgage. I've always been a fan of fixed rate mortgages. You just don't have to gamble with the possibility of interest rates continuing to climb. But there's usually a very small spread between a fixed rate and a variable rate. Usually they're like 0.5% away from each other. Right now we're seeing like 4.5% and
that's right now
3% between fixed and variable. That's a 1.5% difference. That's a big spread. So to me, it makes sense to go with the variable rate mortgages right now, because the odds of interest rates being increased another 1.5% to bring a variable rate up to where fixed rates currently are is not a super likely scenario. And even if that does happen, you're just going to be even with where you would have been if you had a fixed rate mortgage. So that's my personal opinion. I can't see variable rate mortgages going up to 8%, but anything's possible. But that last deal that I was showing you with a high 2% interest rate, it would have cash flowed at the $600,000. So that's still kind of your option, is to try to stick with the variable rate mortgage to make these deals happen. Yeah, buy for cash flow. I actually just cut and paste this slide from last month's meetup into this one because it's the same thing I've been saying for the last 3 years. It has to cash flow. Whether the property goes up in value, down in value, whatever it is really irrelevant if you're paying down that mortgage and you're generating cash flow. If we do see a recession, it really doesn't matter. In 5 years, we're going to be back on track to where we were headed, which is always up. So that's just my opinion. It's when you get yourself into trouble, when you're speculating on increasing property prices to generate a return, and that doesn't happen, that's when you're in a tough situation. Does anyone have any questions about the market or interest rates or anything?
Marky is in Sheffield, and he wrote something about it.
Oh, Marky's chatting something? All right. I have a really hard time accessing the chat while it's in the presentation, so I'll check on that.
But that's a long text.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, Marky. For those of you that haven't met Marky, he's come out to a few of these meetups. He is very clever individual when it comes to understanding economies. He is leaps and bounds ahead of where I am. He's studied economies kind of around the world and understands them quite well. So yeah, not that anybody has a crystal ball, but he might have a slightly better understanding than I do. I'll check what he's asked here. The next bit is going to be tennis with short-term rentals. I'll read this one comment from Marky here real quick, and then yeah, luckily we have an expert on short-term rentals here that can fill us in on that.
Jason, is it recording? Can you share the link to somebody that cannot come tonight? It's recording?
It is recording, yes, I am recording, yeah. So I will post this later. So Marky says rates may stall out this summer around 1% higher from here. Yeah, so I don't know, it's harder to read up there. We usually follow the US Fed, Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, President Ralph so-and-so said the policymakers could potentially pause interest rate increases in September after hiking half point at each of the next 2 meetings. So yeah, we could be looking at going 1% higher, but even then, if you've gone with a variable, that's going to push you from 2.75 to, you know, into the 3s. That's still lower than the 4.5 that is being offered on a fix. I've got a baseline view where for me, I think pause in September might make sense. Yeah, so there's a link here. Yeah, so long story short, we don't really know exactly where we're headed. Everyone's got a bit of an opinion on it, but I guess we'll wait and see come September.
All right. Hi, everybody. Nice to see everyone here. Hi to everyone on Zoom. It's a pleasure to be in person and have an opportunity to talk with you about this exciting investment opportunity of short and long-term rentals. I thought a side-by-side comparison would be helpful with all that's going on in the market. I work with Remax First Realty as a licensed property manager, and I think we'll just do a little overview of what we're going to talk about today. So just a short introduction of myself. Why would somebody want to do short-term rentals? Basically, the key factors that we have to consider for making it really marketable, risks and challenges for short-term rental, and then the same thing for long-term rentals so that you can compare, you know, what are the advantages, what are the risks, and then we're going to do a brief cash flow analysis and then some tips for optimizing your investment, whether you're deciding to continue or start short-term rental or go ahead with long-term. So before we get started, I just want to get a better idea of who you guys are because you're the important ones here. So how many have actually invested at this point in a rental property so far? Great, very good. So we've got some new ones that are eager to start and some that have already dipped their toes in. Now, for those of you that are renting it or you have an investment property, who's already tried short-term rental? Good. Okay, a few. Very good. Don't be shy. No need to be shy. And then, so the rest are doing, I guess, long-term rentals. So, and for you guys, are you from local areas here, or is everybody traveling? Who's from Nanaimo? Just a few of us. And who's on the island? Everybody? Most people? Good. Okay. And for your investments, do you guys self-manage or have a property manager? So self-manage. Good. Well, good. Great. Well, thanks for telling me a bit about yourself. Now, what about for everybody, when you've gone on vacation, who's actually stayed in a short-term rental? So an Airbnb, VRBO, everybody. This is fantastic. Great. So that in itself shows how valuable and in demand short-term rentals are. So a little bit about myself. I've grown up in a small town in the Kootenays. I learned a lot from my parents, who worked in real estate and in construction respectively. So they always taught me by example to have a passion for whatever you do and to have a good, strong work ethic. About 4 years ago, I moved from New Westminster to the island with my husband, Joey. And we have developed a love for real estate investment ourselves. We've taken courses on investing in multifamily, commercial properties, buy, rent, and hold strategies. And we really enjoy finding underperforming properties like this one and fixing it up, putting in that equity, sweat equity, as they call it. So based on this picture, as investors, what do you guys see as wrong with this photo? Right? It's a diamond in the rough. So we enjoy, you know, trying to see the potential of a property, which is something that probably a lot of you as well like to do. So we did a lot of work on this property and turned it into something that improved the functionality, the form and appearance, increasing property value, and making sure that it appeals to the rental market. Because when we do that, we can increase the rents and we can leverage the investment and reinvest it into other properties. So that's kind of our passion. But we also, I personally have managed a portfolio of about 90 rental units over the past 7 years across Western Canada. And so these units have been a combination of short-term rental, long-term rental. Some of it is specific to the mining industry. Some of it is, you know, travel accommodations for people that are working in certain areas or just going for tourism. You can see some of the images here are actual properties that we've managed and that we've put together furnishing packages for. So when it comes to, you know, providing accommodation for people, whether it's a long-term rental or a short-term rental, you are providing an experience and also hopefully improving the quality of somebody's life. So when you're thinking of putting together an investment property for somebody, it's important to think of that person. And that's why I decided to become licensed instead of just doing this portfolio privately. I wanted to provide that high standard of management and ensuring that not only creating places that tenants and guests can enjoy long-term or want to come back to over and over again, but also ensure that the owners that I'm working for are able to maintain their investment, grow their portfolio, and be able to receive that meaningful passive income that everybody's looking for. So before we go a little further, just a disclaimer that obviously this presentation is just general information. So if you have something specific that you're concerned about with your particular property, I'd be happy to talk to you about it one-on-one, but this is just sort of general information for everybody. So let's get into it. Why do people want to do short-term rentals? Well, as we've seen, everybody is looking at that for their vacation, for you know, their experience that they can enjoy while they're away. As an investor, we have seen that there are higher returns than long-term rentals. There's also flexibility for use. So if you own a property that you want to enjoy as your own vacation property and still have some passive income, that's what short-term rentals can allow you to do. And again, people are wanting to enjoy, something different than the standard hotel when they go away. So those are some reasons why people choose to do that. Next, we're going to talk about some key factors when you're looking at maybe purchasing or improving an investment property specifically for short-term rental. A lot of the important details are to do with location. So how far is it to the grocery store? How far is it to all of these amenities in town, event centers? Is there a tourism industry that drives it? How accessible is transportation? All of these things really can either make your rental stand out from the others, or if it's difficult to get to, all of those things can impact how desirable and how marketable it's going to be. The other item is interior furnishings and design. So this is something that if you've taken a look on Airbnb, and we're going to do a little comparison in a minute, that really can make this stay for people very enjoyable or very difficult, and you'll end up with a bad review. So those are very important. So when it comes to furnishing, you want to make sure that your linens are high quality. Your bed is a really comfortable bed that people will be able to sleep in, without any interruption. Cleanliness is a huge thing, and having the design be uncluttered so that people can just enjoy the atmosphere. Having all of the, kitchenwares and appliances and blow dryer, shampoo, things that you think of that maybe you haven't packed in your suitcase, right? So the other thing is to know your guests. Again, why are they traveling to the area that your rental is in? Are they coming because they're a student and they're coming for courses? Are they coming because they are doing a family vacation? Are they traveling for work? All of those questions will impact what you put in your suite. Who's your guest? Who are you tailoring it to? Do you want it to be accessible for all of those people? Or is it something that, you want it specifically for families? So you're going to put in a baby crib, and you're going to put in some toys, and you're going to put in all of these tailored features that really show thoughtfulness when it comes to, why you've given them that place to enjoy. So then let's take a look at presentation. We also want to think about our competition, right? So if you're doing a short-term rental, people are either going to decide to go on booking.com or somewhere else that is a basic hotel, or maybe they want a bit more luxurious hotel, so they'll book somewhere like the Westin in Whistler. So when you look at these photos, this is actual marketing for the Westin in Whistler. What do you guys notice about the photos? What stands out to you?
No space, tiny rooms.
Yeah, they're very compact. Yeah.
White,
White. Why do you think they chose white?
because it's clean.
Clean, very
It's
clean.
easy to replace later in case something missing or damage. It's always easy to replace it with the match.
Absolutely. And white, sorry?
It expands the eye, like it expands.
Exactly. Yeah, and so they featured, we've got this nice white bedspread. Yes, the rooms are compact, but they look very clean. The furnishings are, they're not dated, they're modern. And it emphasizes that there's a view, the nice neighborhood, the bathroom looks, pretty immaculately clean. So these are all things to keep in mind. They've had professional photos done, obviously, so that always helps. Now let's compare that to these. So somebody has really put in a lot of effort to, make their house comfortable, to put in some interesting artwork, but the photos have really detracted from the appeal that this property might have. It looks like kind of a funky place. So it really underscores how important presentation is when you're preparing your property, whether you're putting it on Airbnb or VRBO or wherever you're putting the marketing. It makes it a lot more attractive if you can actually see what's in there, that the lighting is good. So here's an example of, this is an Airbnb rental, but it looks like a hotel, doesn't it? It looks very calming and everything's very clean. Now, this being said, not everybody's short-term rental necessarily has those built-in, travertine or all of those things, but it is possible to make it even more appealing, even if you don't have those features, as long as you consider the design and the furniture that you're putting in there and the lighting. So now our next part, does anybody have any questions so far about short-term rental features that we've discussed? No? Good. Okay. So risks and challenges to short-term rental. So a big thing, insurance has gone through a lot with short-term rentals, and they charge more for it typically because of the higher risk with short-term rentals. So if you think about long-term rental, people are staying there, there's a damage deposit, they want to live in that house, so they're going to take better care of it. But short-term rentals, there is a bit of a higher risk with people throwing parties or, just not having that commitment to the property because it's a short-term rental. So it's very important to make your insurance providers aware that you're doing a short-term rental, because there are companies that will just not insure short-term rentals. There are a lot out there that still will, but it's important to convey that so that you have the appropriate coverage in case something unfortunate does happen. There's also features now of Airbnb. They have air cover. So that's an additional perk to using their services for property owners if something goes wrong, in addition to your regular insurance for your property. So those are all factors that are important to consider. There's also challenges sometimes with short-term rentals on the island anyways. We think of how popular it is in the summer and in the weather, when it's nice and sunny, but in the winter, there may be some seasonal vacancy. So that means you have to consider your price point, right? So in the summertime, when it's in high demand, you can maybe up the price. And then in the winter or the off season, you might have less dollar per night. But if you can average that out over the year and it still makes sense, then that's when you're going to be able to really make a profit from it. The other thing to consider with short-term rental is strata and municipal bylaws. So if you have a condo where you're part of a strata, sometimes strata's bylaws will restrict rentals altogether, or they may just restrict short-term rentals. And that, not following that can actually result in fines or, there's all kinds of issues. Nanaimo, I was going to use that example for changing bylaws in the municipality. So probably many of you are aware they've recently been working towards having restrictions on short-term rental. So now, instead of it being sort of free reign for any residential property for short-term rental, the property has to be, for anything that's under 30 days, the property has to be somebody's primary residence. It has to be, so for primary residence, that you live in it for 8 months of the year. So it's not just, half of the year, it's 8 months. And then they've restricted the number of rooms you can rent depending on the size of your home. There's parking requirements, there's business licenses that are required, and you have to be available for complaints from the neighborhood or from people in the area. Some of the business licenses are, maybe affordable, a couple $100. Areas like Victoria, their business licenses can go up to $1,500 for the year. So it all makes an impact in your bottom line. And a lot of these bylaws that are popping up in all kinds of communities across BC, there's, UBCM is sort of pushing a lot of the communities to control short-term rentals so that there's more long-term housing available to people. But in most cases, these bylaws are complaint driven. So if somebody complains, then the bylaw officer will go and deal with it. However, there are certain municipalities that have like a task force that looks through all of these sites that are so easily accessible to try and find who has a short-term rental that isn't zoned for it. So there are definitely some big challenges with short-term rental, and it has a huge potential for bigger income, but it has to be the right type of property. And it's hard to say, you know, in Nanaimo or in whatever municipality that you're in, to what level the government will enforce those bylaws that they have. So it's a very personal choice on what your comfort level is with that risk. So, and again, back to strata bylaws, you know, when you're looking at investing in a property, it's really important to try and review all of the bylaws and recent minutes. And hopefully, you know, if you're looking to rent something as a short-term rental in a stratified property, they would have that allowance for short-term rentals, but it can change over time. So if you have a council that doesn't want it, then they can try and encourage the rest of the owners to try and vote that out. So it's just important to be aware of those factors when you're looking at different properties. The other thing that's different with short-term rental is that because you're offering a service, you have to report your GST, collect that, and remit it to the government. So there is more accounting involved. And in general, it's more time intensive. So somebody contacts you, I want to book your place. Okay, great. Yes, it's available. Okay, pay me the money. It goes through the payment. And then they're coming to check in. So you have to tell them, okay, here's how you check in and here's how you get in the door. And if there's anything that comes up with that property, then you're the one that's on call to deal with, oh, the toilets overflowed or whatever could happen, right? It can be quite it can be very rewarding, but it can also take up a lot of time if you're dealing with those kinds of challenges. So there are things that we're going to talk about a little bit later that will make it a little easier in terms of your time involvement. But again, just factors to consider. So we're going to move on to long-term rentals as a comparison. I'm just going to have a quick sip of this, sorry. Yes, you have a question?
So if you decide to start your short-term rentals and like it's time consuming and you start without license and you're in a process, and somebody come and talk to you that you don't have a license, what is the fine fees in different areas, including maybe island if you're aware of, or in BC in general, or from municipality to whatever could be varies. So that's what I'm kind of interested in.
Yeah, good question. Very good question. So it really varies from municipality to municipality. So for example, in Victoria, it can be up to $500 a day if you are renting something out that isn't, you know, and I don't know how strict, like probably there's some room for discretion with the bylaw officer as to whether it's the first time or if it's happening again. You know, those things always make an impact. I would really recommend taking a look at Nanaimo's guideline for their new short-term rental housing. Just one moment. And they also have the new bylaw that they've proposed that's out and available. So I'd really recommend, as you know, educated investors like you are, to be involved and take a look at what the municipality has for information. You can contact their general information line too without disclosing, here's my property, come and find me. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, due diligence is a must, of course.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But still, because we talk about, so I saw
Yes.
that you are licensed professionals, so I thought I will ask now.
Yeah.
Get some general ideas.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. And your question?
Yeah, you mentioned that in order to have Airbnb, it has to be your primary residence.
That's in Nanaimo for short-term rental. I was referring to, it has to be it's according to their bylaws. It's supposed to be a primary residence. So you either live there for 8 months of the year and then rent it out for the 4 months or any other period
Right.
that's less than that time. Or you can have a portion of your house where you live in the main part and a smaller portion is an ongoing continuous rental.
With a carriage house.
So if
Exactly.
if you bought, let's say, like, renters.
Yeah.
As an investment property.
Yeah.
You just wanted to Airbnb it out, you're not allowed to do that.
That's what Nanaimo is saying. Yeah. Yeah.
Another question.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. If you bought a house and it has a suite in it.
Yeah.
and has a main part of the house.
Yeah.
What if one of those is a long-term rental and the other one is a short-term rental?
Yeah, so again, they're making, in Nanaimo anyways, they're making it hinge on you as an owner making that your primary residence. So technically, it wouldn't fit within the bylaws if you're renting the upstairs as a long-term and the downstairs.
Just saying in Nanaimo that doesn't qualify.
So even if you have a business license, you still cannot do it, right? Like different licensing.
Yeah, so the business license has to be specific to short-term rental. So like if you have a, you know, a spa in your home that you operate, you also have to have another license for the short-term
You
rental.
can't get a license for the 3-bedroom ranch.
Probably not, yeah, yeah.
Well, Andrew lives in there. Yes, Andrew.
How about medium-term rentals? Like if it's longer than.
30.
Yeah.
I want to ask a question.
Say a month and a half.
Like, can I-
Yeah.
Somebody comes into town and wants.
I don't know how to do that.
for a month and a half, then leave again. So
Yeah.
Don't book long-term.
Right, so let's talk a little bit, I'm gonna circle back to that because I think it's important to understand. It's a very good question and it's one that I'm planning on answering, so we should understand, I mean, you probably have an idea on long-term rentals anyways, but this will give you a better idea of what criteria that type of rental will fall under. If it's more than 30 days, it goes under the residential tenancy branch. So the advantages, why long-term rental? It gives consistent passive income. So as an alternative to, you know, maybe you get a booking, maybe you don't. This is every month, somebody's agreed to pay a specific amount. It also has lower overall expenses. So a lot of them can be downgraded to the tenant. They can pay their own utilities. They can do the yard maintenance. They can, you know, make sure that the house is kept in a particularly, you know, sanitary condition. All of those things in the long run, you know, end up saving you money. You don't have to pay for laundry service or cleaning after somebody checks out. So those are advantages. It's also GST exempt. So if you're doing long-term rental that's over 30 days, it doesn't have to, you don't have to remit GST on that. So then let's go into the key factors for long-term rental. And a lot of these transcend both criteria for long and short-term rental. Location is important. The things that might be different for a long-term rental is, you know, are there schools where their kids can go to, or does it have a yard for their dog if you're going to do a pet-friendly long-term rental? So then, you know, there's different factors that might appeal more to somebody who wants to stay long-term in an area. Is it close to their work? You know, who's going to be your long-term tenant is the question you have to ask. And then, you know, sometimes people might want a larger square footage, whereas you could get away with something smaller if it's just a hotel style rental. That being said, there's really high demand for long-term rentals all over BC right now. So people are willing to rent, you know, smaller properties that will still give you a good return. On-site amenities like a washer and dryer, dishwasher, all of those things, you know, does it have a garage? Does it have a shed? Those things will be appealing to people. And again, knowing your tenant. So if you've got, you know, a 1-bedroom condo, it's not going to be suitable for a family. So who are you marketing it to? Now the risks and challenges of long-term rentals. So there are complex provincial regulations. So let's use that example that Anya had of somebody coming for a month and a half. They said they're going to come for a month and a half. So great, they've agreed to that. Now, if you just go ahead and give them the unit like you would with an Airbnb or VRBO or short-term rental, you don't vet them. You know, you're trusting in those softwares to do that part of it. Maybe they're going to change their mind after a month and a half and say, I want to stay here. And because it's under the residential tenancy branch, you've already given me this. So it means that I can stay for as long as I want. You can't evict me unless there's certain criteria. So that's when I would recommend that you use a professional to deal with those seasonal or midterm rentals. There is a way that in your contract, you can encourage them to actually leave at the end of that agreement. But there is definitely a certain level of risk that hopefully they're just the vacation rental person, but they may end up staying longer. So that's a challenge. Other thing to consider is if you're doing specifically a long-term rental, if there's tenant damage, or let's say they don't pay their rent for a series of time, it can be a challenge to evict them, get them out, because you have to go through the residential tenancy branch, you have to have a hearing. So it's really important to have an airtight tenancy agreement in that case, so that the precedent is set and to have that consistent management. So if there is an issue, it's immediately addressed and that strict standard is maintained, so that, you know, people that maybe would push the limits and stay longer, they recognize there's accountability there. The other challenge for some investors, if they're not planning on holding their property for a long time and they rent to somebody long-term, when they put their property up for sale, hopefully you have an agreeable tenant who understands the situation and will allow for viewings or will allow for you know, access. But in order to move somebody out, like let's say you end up having a buyer that wants to buy your property, you're ready to flip this property and make your cash on it and go on to the next thing. In order for that tenant to be required to move out, the buyer has to move into that property. So if they want to buy it as an investment property, they actually technically have to move in there, them or their immediate family, so a parent or a sibling. So not uncle so-and-so who's your fifth cousin removed. Exactly, yeah. Not a sibling?
No.
No, yeah, up or down, not sideways.
Okay, well, thank you. So
I like that one.
let's get that straight, up or down, I like that. Yeah, right. So that's important, right? That's a factor as an investor. If you're looking to move your funds onto the next project, then that's something to consider. Does anybody have any questions so far before we look at the side-by-side cash flow? Yeah.
I have a question. So generally for rentals,
Mhm.
it's kind of expected that you use a template from the tenancy board. Right?
There is one that you can use from
Yeah. So
the government site.
what would you suggest? Just tightening up the clauses or adding clauses to that template?
Yeah, there's a lot that can be added. Yeah, so that would be a whole other topic.
Yeah.
But yes, yeah, I would recommend having an addendum that goes through a lot more specific detailed requirements. Yeah.
Every time you have a tenant, you'll add a little bit more.
That's right.
The entire property.
That's true. Good. So this comparison is a very basic high-level comparison of a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, not super high-end, but basic condo in Nanaimo. So if we can see here, the rental rate for short-term rental on the left is 170 a night. So that's averaging throughout the off-season and the summer. That would bring you to around 62,000 in gross income. We've got your expenses on the left, so 2,500 for the annual taxes. Insurance would be like, and again, these are just rough estimates, around 2,000. And water and sewer would be around 800 a year, electricity around 1,200, snow and garbage removal 300, cleaning and laundry is around 5,500, and that's based on having an average of 4-night stays at 40% vacancy. So, and then the internet, of course. So you've got all of your expenses totaling 13,000. So then I like to be conservative 40% vacancy is high, and I think in a lot of cases, if you price it appropriately, you can get much higher, like better vacancy than that. But this just shows you as an estimate that at the end of the day, your net income would be around 23,000 from a short-term rental. So that gives you, you'd have to pay your mortgage out of that still. Now, if we look at the long-term rental, same expenses except for a few less. So the tenant is going to pay their own electricity. They're also going to do the snow and garbage, and they're going to, you won't need to do the checkout clean. So there's no laundry or cleaning fees. And they're going to pay their own internet. So we've got a total of $4,900 in annual expenses. The rental rate is going to be $1,900 a month for a 2-bedroom in Nanaimo with 3% vacancy, which is generous for this area. So then your net income after your expenses is around 17,000.
Oh,
So you can see there is definitely potential for more income on this side. However, there's more involvement required and there's a higher vacancy. So it really depends on how you market your property, and are you allowing one-night stays? Are you having promotions to get people in there? There's all kinds of things that you can do to reduce your vacancy on the short-term rental side of things. And then the other thing to consider is management fees. So if you're doing it yourself, then obviously you're saving the management fees, but it's all your own time, right? So how valuable is your time? What could you be doing with your time? So the typical short-term rental management fees in this area from multiple companies, you'll find their standard is 30%. So it cuts in a lot to your net. But if you have a property that's priced appropriately, that's making enough money, and all you need to do is collect the money in the bank, it sits there, it just ends up in your bank account, then it might make sense for you. Long-term rental, the standard for 1-year lease type long-term rental is 10%. So again, that would come off of the bottom here. So those are kind of the general expenses to expect on those two properties. Does anybody else have questions or insight into their own experience maybe with either of these forms of rental?
No, I have a question later on GST when we sell the property.
Okay.
That would be something I'm interested in, because if we pay now already, like in the short-term rental market, we pay the GST already. If you sell the house eventually, you still have to pay, or does the buyer have to pay the GST? You know what I mean?
I think they may be separate, but it's a good question for your accountant.
Okay.
I would recommend checking with an actual accountant on that question, because the GST for the rental, I would imagine is specific to that type of income, not. If you know, that's great.
person has to pay on
So
top.
because it's an Airbnb, because there are two ways where, obviously it's an accounting question, but from my experience, if a property is brand new and it's a short-term rental, then you pay GST. But you can defer it through your accountant, and then the next buyer will pay and then defer. That your accountant has to structure it, so you won't have to pay GST.
It's also, if you ask an accountant, every accountant will tell you something different. They'll all tell you it depends. So the only person that can definitively tell you is the seller's accountant. So that the concept is, if it's being done as a commercial property, which hotels are, then it attracts GST. The only real estate that is exempt from GST is residential, whether that's multifamily residential or single family residential. So once you start running it as an Airbnb, the question is that now a commercial piece of property or a residential piece of property? That depends. If you ran it as an Airbnb 1 bedroom for 1 night, is that now a commercial piece of property? No. If you bought it and rented out the top and bottom as short-term rentals for 5 years, is that now a commercial piece of property? Probably. So It really depends on how it's been run, how long it's been run, if you were using it as a long-term rental before it was a short-term rental. It's a big gray area and no one will give you a definitive answer. Your accountant will even say it depends, and at the end of the day, will be up to the CRA if they audit you and say, hey, we think this is a commercial property, prove to me that it's not a commercial property. So it's always going to be a question, unfortunately. There's no definitive answer.
And that GST, if you defer it, that means when you sell the house, it's on the seller, not on the buyer.
Well, when you go to sell it, it's always the buyer that pays the GST.
Right.
It's not, but are they going to offer you less money? Or if you're selling $1 million house, that's $50,000 of GST.
That's right,
Or they
that's
just
right.
say, I'm only going to pay you $950,000 for it because I have to pay $50,000 GST. Or
What happened to you?
Yeah, it's included in the sale, because you are aware that you're buying an Airbnb.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so like in
Great.
your situation, if you sold that house for $1 million, let's say, you technically sold it for 950,000 because you deferred the GST.
Yeah, anytime you provide service, that's why it's GST. And at the same time, Airbnb, they will require you to have to provide your GST. So you can really say this.
Mhm.
But it's
That's why
tough.
I'm asking, because you already.
And we're talking about selling $1 million house for $950.
But you can remit it.
When do you pay
question
GST?
of the GST has nothing really to do with the GST payable on the sale.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
even my accountant, I was running like a small automotive restoration company on my property.
You don't pay
And
GST in a house when you
so I was writing off a percentage of the property
Used for
tax, the
Airbnb.
interest on the mortgage, everything.
Short-term Airbnb,
Thing there, Mike, everything's
For sure.
had very definitive threshold of what she wanted me to write off. She said, if you go over this.
paying GST every time it's being
write off more than whatever it was, 30% or 40% of your expenses for this property, you're going to be viewed as commercial or could be viewed as commercial when you go to sell. So let's keep it under this percentage and you'll probably be okay. But even then, she said probably, right? It's up to the CRA. So, yeah.
Okay, yes,
Just going back to the property management, the 30 and the 10%.
Yeah.
Is that off the rental rate or off the net?
it's off the rental rate.
That's what I thought. So if you look at that, it's roughly 20,000 on that, on the short term,
Mhm.
which means your net comes down to like 3,000,
Mhm.
right? And then the
Yeah.
other one, it's 2,000. So in this particular case, it's more profitable than it's even with property.
But the cleaning and
You just-
laundry,
if you are,
that's bringing somebody in to do.
Yeah, so if you're doing the cleaning and the laundry yourself, then obviously
yeah,
that's
so
your
you're-
time, right? You're not gonna pay off the bottom, but you know, you can only do so many units. Like if you're just doing one rental, then that's great, but if you have others, you're gonna be very busy cleaning and doing laundry. So this is an estimate based on an average of 4-night stay, so minimum 4 nights, so then the cleaner comes in after the 4th night, and that's based on 40% vacancy. So if you're booked more, then obviously the number goes up, right?
Cleaners are expensive too now.
Yeah,
They're not cheap anymore.
yeah, no, it's true.
Charge to the tenant, to the person staying there.
That's true. There is a feature that you can add cleaning fees, so then that doesn't impact you as much. So it's a very good point. And again, like on these different platforms like Airbnb, you can customize a lot of different, you can have a pet fee, you can have an additional person fee. So the size of the property, like if you have more bedrooms, you've probably heard the money is in the beds. So the more heads that you have in beds, the more money you're going to get out of your rental property. So if you have a 5-bedroom home, that's going to be a vacation property for families to come to throughout the summer, then you're going to make more than a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, but the investment initial cost is going to be a lot more. And one thing that we haven't discussed so far is the cost for furnishing a property. So, we looked at some of those images of, nice beds, nice, couches or sitting areas. You have to do all of the linens, the bedding, small appliances for the kitchen, like a toaster and a crock pot and you know, utensils, like there's a whole list that we have that's probably 4 pages long of items that we recommend people put in their rental units so that people really have everything they need. So that can be significant, like on a small property, if you're gonna, you know, go and get everything secondhand, then maybe you could, you know, get away with, you know, 10,000 or something like that for a smaller, yes?
We
So
didn't pay too.
when you start advertising your short.
I might go somewhere
I'm
else.
talking about cost of furniture.
You
Furniture.
say damage deposit, pet
and you might get away with
deposit, cleaning
10,000.
fees, all of that.
Yeah.
If you charge $400 a night just for coverage for plus stars, it's gonna be around 600 a night if you include all of it, because
Yeah.
cleaning fee, I saw somewhere around $70, damage deposit, whatever, I
Mhm.
can't remember, it was
Yeah.
variety of numbers.
Mhm.
So, and the
Speakers
website, if it's an option.
Mhm.
up there,
with
it's
your
just
cleaning fee or
I-
damage deposit.
loud.
Damage deposit was before you
Clarity isn't there. You probably.
come in,
Mhm.
and cleaning deposit, it was after.
Mhm.
After
Company has really strong
a while, when cleaners come in and see if it's like too much damage, it's take a longer time for them to clean.
Constantly
Because
like,
it can be disaster, depends on the place, depends on how many people stay there.
Yeah.
And what if people, let's say, book for 3 people, but it's actually turns out when they come and clean, it's over 10 people. And it's absolutely disaster, gonna take 10 hours of cleaning rather than 3 cleaners, it's an hour.
Yeah.
So, what is the proper way to structure on the website that people actually not scared of and not gonna.
Bedroom place, sometimes the people, way more people in there and the cleaning.
How it's
outrageous.
better attractive.
They may have one cleaning fee,
Page and.
cleaning going is 2 hours, another.
Can attract more rentals.
Yeah.
Still
How do
not
you-
gonna cost you more after all when they move out, so basically like a structure.
That's a good question. So I would say that there is that fine line of you're charging for this experience that you're creating for people, right? So we're selling it as it's better than a hotel because you're staying in this beautiful, you know, part of the community home. And so yes, you can sometimes charge more for that. But at what point does it become unaffordable and the people are just going to book a hotel because it's available, right? So it really is a case-by-case scenario in that circumstance of how you price it appropriately. There are features like, and that's one of the things that I was going to get into next about optimizing your rental property is there's different software that can help you price your property appropriately, like AirDNA is one that gives a lot of insights on local to whatever your property is. That will help you have a good idea. They also have a lot of blogs that are very informative for short-term rental owners. In terms of the security deposit and the cleaning fee, I think it's important to be transparent. Some people are used to that structure, like Airbnb does it, is here's the advertised price, and then once you add the people and everything, it's like, oh, that's $500 more than I thought it was going to be. So yes, that does turn people away sometimes. So I think the more transparency that you can give on your listing, the better. And you have to make it so that you're not losing out at the end of the day if things are lost or if things are damaged or if there's additional cleaning. That's when you know, things like air cover might be a good thing where they're supposed to back owners up on what they've lost. And
What is air cover?
have you used Airbnb? Have you used Airbnb yet?
Yeah.
Okay, so they have this new feature that is called air cover. And there's a lot of details that it offers, but just as an overview, it gives insurance basically if, let's say somebody gets COVID and they have to cancel their booking, or if there's damage, there's insurance there. It's like a fund basically that they give you additional insurance for those types of situations. And they also have criteria of making a claim if your tenants or your guests have damaged your property. You can go through the process of appealing, you know, here's the before photos, here's the after photos. here's all the damage, this is what it cost me, and you can send that to them. That being said, it's hard to say how their team will decide what you end up with, right? So I think having somebody that's hands-on and really is paying close attention, like if you have good cleaners that know exactly what's supposed to be in the unit, they have a checklist of everything that gets furnished. So then if something's stolen, you know it's missing and you can report it right away, because there are time limits on those things as well. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, great. So again, if we go to optimizing your rental property. So if your plan is to have multiple investment properties, then we want to make it as turnkey as possible. So having those systems in place where you know, the check-in instructions are automatically sent to the owner. The guidebook for the guests is easily accessible, so they know how to get their internet. They know how to get, you know, access to whatever they need in that unit. Having that planning in advance before you start renting it out, and really testing your rental. Like, pretend you're the guest and go and see, okay, how is this going to go? Am I going to enjoy a place that, you know, like, or have somebody that, you know, go and stay there for free and give you feedback. I think those are really important things, especially when you're just getting started. So that, you know, is there something about it that's not functional, or it was hard to find a coffee maker, or whatever, you know, like all of those little details can really make a person's stay, you know, go from mediocre to it was fabulous, you know, and I want to go back every time. So those are things that will really help. And having a local, you know, expert sort of guidebook of here's the places that I like to go, and here's, you know, the great food, this is the dish that I like. Those things are a really personal touch that, especially on places like Airbnb, they're trying to sell not just, I don't know if you've seen their revamp that they just recently did, but they're trying to sell not just a place to stay, but an actual experience. So they have this new search feature where you can search for an oceanfront place. You can search for a yurt. You can search for a camper. You can, you know, a tent. People are renting tents for hundreds of dollars a night, you know, like, so having that additional what sets you apart as different and is more interesting. I think travelers are becoming more and more educated, and their expectations are getting higher all the time because people are doing a great job of it, but there's also, you know, a lot of people traveling more locally. So I think that those are important to keep in mind. There's other software that will populate your ads to multiple sites that can also increase your income. So those could be in handy. And of course, it has to make sense for your bottom line, right? If you only have one rental unit, maybe it's not affordable to add all of these other softwares. But if you have multiple, it can be really, really advantageous to stimulate that income. The other thing about making it turnkey is having, you know, smart locks. And if you're concerned about security, you can have, you know, something as simple as a Ring doorbell that you can see when people are coming and going. And those things make it easier so that you don't have to be on site all the time. Even thermostats can be automated. So all of those things that will impact your bottom line, you know, if it's costing you more electricity, that's going to impact you. So the other thing to keep in mind is with, you know, these nice hotels that are competition for short-term rentals, they budget to redo their whole interiors every 5 to 10 years. So when you're choosing your furniture and your dishes and everything that goes into these units, keep in mind that in 10 years, 5 years, maybe it's going to be out of date, and that's going to impact the marketability of your property. So I love some of the Airbnbs that I've stayed at are very quirky and very interesting. And I love going to those places because it really is an experience. So if you can do that, but also have that budget consciousness that, you know, it may need to be redone in a few years, and budget for that, because then it's going to be a long-term source of income for you. So in terms of Airbnb and VRBO, they have different fee structures. Airbnb, they charge 3% to the owner and they charge 14% to the guest. So you see a number that you want to make, they're going to charge you 3% off of that, and they're going to add 14% on top that the guest gets charged. So that's something to be aware of too, because maybe you think you're renting it for $100 a night, but it's actually being $114, right? So that will impact the accessibility for people too, as the dollar value goes up. VRBO is a flat 5% plus processing fees, or they can do an annual fee of $500 a year, and that would be for as many bookings as you like. So Airbnb, they do the payment processing for you in that 3%, but VRBO, they charge additional if somebody's paying by credit card or that kind of thing. And so, yeah, those are the, I would say Airbnb and VRBO are the most popular, but there are other sites out there that certainly can draw in guests. And the thing that's really important with short-term rentals is prompt response. So if people are messaging you, like imagine you're at a hotel and you don't have the towels you need, so you call the front desk and nobody answers. Well, that's going to be really frustrating, right? So it's the same thing with Airbnb or VRBO. You become the concierge, you become the hotel staff that is creating that seamless experience for them. So you can do that yourself, or if you want to have somebody do that for you, having that expert that's on call all the time, that will give you the freedom to have, do whatever you like with your time and receive that passive income and really have hands-off investment. So those are the ways that I'd recommend to optimize your rental income on short-term or long-term rental. And that's the end of my presentation. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Yes.
When you work as a property manager, do you ever hire virtual assistant? Let's say you're going for vacation yourself, or you're not feeling well or something. Do you have anybody handy in that kind of scenario, or you have as a staff to help you out because you have so many properties to manage?
Yeah, so I don't have a virtual assistant, but I do have people that help me accomplish what I need to do, because even for myself, I can't do it all myself, right? And everybody has different areas of strength. So it's, for me, building a property management portfolio, it's important to have the right team that can be effective, can communicate properly, that will carry out their task 100%. So,
so are you paying them over 30% of the charge to whoever you're managing property for, or you include that 30% and pay percentage to your helpers?
It's included. Yeah, that's right.
And you're paying hourly rates? Sorry.
It depends on the circumstances.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are you seeing in certain short-term rentals that there seems to be demand for, but there's no supply of?
Ooh.
Something kind of a niche.
Niche. Oh, that's hard. Do they?
Well, from my experience, with all my B&Bs, because I work at the hospital, so my B&Bs are like business B&Bs for like healthcare workers, So that was, there's also like theme, because like some are like 60s or some are like anime themed. So there's lots of YouTube videos about it. So, but then for me, that restricts your market, But definitely it gives you outstanding from the rest.
Seems like multiple pets.
Yeah.
A full-on do allow.
Can I add on the
Yes,
optimism rental?
please. Yeah.
Yes, she's right. A very great presentation, by the way. For the values, that's very conservative. Another advantage of short-term rental is the dynamic pricing, because you run kind of like a hotel. You can change the pricing per day, on the weekends, and that will make you make money. So yes, like my 2-bedroom in Nanaimo makes $60,000 a year. And then also another advantage of short-term rental is you don't have to deal with rental board. So that's one thing I can add. And but then on the investment side, for long term, if you wanna take money or go to the bank, short-term rental, they don't consider it as an income because it's unstable. So that's a downside. But you can work with your mortgage broker to be creative. Like if you're gonna rent it, how much would it cost? It's called rental analysis. But yeah, so far it's good. And then I like that you mentioned medium-term rental because there's short-term rental, there's long-term rental, but there's a hybrid in between, which is medium-term rental.
Yeah.
So, and also if you guys are considering that in Nanaimo, the city is very responsive to all the increase because when I have 5, and then I was like, hey, it's very gray zone when you roll out this this bylaw, and then you know, but then they're very sticky with the 30-day. So what I was able to do, fortunately, is there are companies that are working and they hire my property for like corporate rental, you know. So they rent it for 9 months. We'll hire your 5 B&Bs and book it for 9 months. So like, okay, great. Then the city's like, as long as more than 30 days, you're good.
Yeah.
So that's one way to,
Yeah.
And I've never seen any property management that manage short-term rental in Nanaimo.
Really?
Yeah, so I was like, okay, but you know, with automation, I manage it myself with the app and it's pretty good.
Yeah. Well, I'm here.
Oh, okay. I was gonna ask you, you guys do manage short-term rental?
I do, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So if anybody is interested in discussing their property specifically, I'm happy to do that. I'll be around here for a few minutes. And thank you so much for your insights because you've got a lot of experience hands-on with the short-term rental side of things. So that's great. Any other questions before? Yes?
And just a little bit more on the medium-term rental and not triggering tenants.
Right. So you either trigger one or the other. It is tricky. So 30 days is 30 days or less is short term. And that's when the GST is triggered. That's when you're under the Consumer Protection Act is what governs short-term rental. As soon as it goes for over a month, it goes into the Residential Tenancy Act. So it really depends on the circumstances, but there is a mutual end to tenancy that I would probably incorporate into the initial tenancy agreement, because then that is the tenant acknowledging I'm agreeing to move out at this date and I understand the circumstances. So that would be, you know, anything over a month if you're trying to keep
in that case, for that example, you're still under tenants, but you have a mutual agreed.
Yes, you've done it according to their requirements.
Yeah.
In order for them to have to move out at that date, they have to sign off. Yes, I agree. The form says, you know, you may be forfeiting a claim to whatever, right? But that it shows, okay, they read it, they agree, they understand, they have to move out at that certain time. So
And then what if they don't? What's your option?
then you would probably have to go to the tenancy branch or your property manager deals with it.
But because you fall under tenancy, then you have to go through, if you don't have a property manager.
Yeah.
You'd have to go through the exact same thing as a long-term rental.
Exactly. Yeah, because it is classified as long-term, even though we're calling it seasonal or
You
midterm.
can't call cops and say they're trespassing.
Yeah, you can try. I mean, you can try anything, but I don't know how well it will go.
They're squatters. They're squatting in, you know, I've never had so far in here.
Yeah.
The thing is with Airbnb, they hold your credit card. So,
Right.
You know.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the beauty of it, and that's great that the platform holds that.
That's true.
But they know that Airbnb does a lot to protect your ass.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They do.
Much better than government.
Big time.
Insurance wise alone, and things like.
Yeah.
That's right.
Like what if they party destroy the place, well, you're insured.
Right.
Pay for that.
Yeah. You had a question?
Yeah, would there be a way to put one of those forms into the Airbnb contract or the other website as well, so they're already signing it at when they're asking you to stay in their place or whatever?
So if you're advertising on Airbnb as a long-term rental, is that what you mean, or?
Yeah, so like a medium term where it'd be 30 days, just over 30 days. Is there a way to put one of those forms so you're automatically signing it when you're wanting to stay in that person's place?
I think that's kind of a sticky thing with Airbnb, because from my experience, they have, you know, request, deny or accept within 24 hours. So unless you can get them to agree to give me your email, which they block, and I'll send you some paperwork, it's not easy to do. So unless you start with them maybe as a short-term rental and then communicate with them directly and give them the paperwork, here's the option if you want to stay longer.
But then how realistically, because somebody is gonna pay like short-term rental fees.
It's all about-
Long-term stay.
Mhm.
That's-
they would.
that's-
I would say that there are a lot of people that travel seasonally, and you gave the perfect example
You
of
think they come
companies
out of
that
it?
come in and do work in certain areas, and they just need a bunch of rooms for their workers to stay in, and they'll stay for 6 months sometimes, or 9, or, you know, sometimes it ends up being longer, but they're paying for that ability to leave at any time if their contract changes.
Airbnb I stayed at, I was there for a few days, and then she was like, felt me out enough to be like, we'll offer you this rate for a month. So that was her kind of vetting process. Using Airbnb and then pay her cash for the next month. So that was one way. She did that.
But then
I went
she's
there
not,
for the fees.
but then she's not insured if you say no.
That's
then
right.
you don't
Yeah.
have to look at Airbnb.
Yeah.
If you-
Risky.
So if you take it through this place.
True.
And
Like, put on
and
my
then how do you
space
get
and then
that,
wreck it.
You have the insurance, right? So it's not layers, right? You
Mhm.
have most of your tubes now
Air cover.
right? And then you have your insurance and you have the deposit. So it's quite a few things, right? So even if you don't go through Airbnb, you still have your insurance. It's not that you completely.
You're talking about going through Airbnb for medium term,
That insurance actually covers the
Mm.
damages.
but it, you know, like Airbnb,
Because
they
it's very
give
easy
you
back and
3%, the
forth.
owner 3%, and they charge the guest
For the water,
14%.
we're talking the example of a company taking, are they using your?
I wasn't aware of that.
platform, the book
And
or-
it's-
Some people might, it
Yes.
depends. Yeah, yeah.
Because I was gonna say, is Airbnb limit you to a maximum?
But they're saying like, how do you get away?
No, I think
from-
they have long-term stays that they're offering now, yeah. Mhm.
So
Like,
when
people are
you
worried about the-
actually
the tenants.
start as a new.
Of course.
from
Like she
there,
says, how do you get them
and
out?
You decide to
Yeah.
dispose as they do
So-
advertisement for you, or
Mhm.
it's
And
still
the
your
short-term,
responsibility to.
As soon as they're
to
in
keep
over
it-
30
keep the
days, the
coverage
tenant
to run
goes.
your business smoothly.
Sorry, what do you mean?
Airbnb guests
An
that
Airbnb
that has
has a
booked for
platform
5
where
weeks.
you're below, as a
By law, they're-
for you,
And they can, she said.
Hey, Robert. Hey, Robert, are you there, buddy?
that you are actually visible
Mhm.
hear me?
in the market,
Mhm.
or it's still.
Hello, Rob. Yeah, your
Your
thing's on, it's not on mute. We can hear everything. If lower left-hand corner, if you put it
There
on
are
mute.
certain criteria that will
it's
get
coming
your property populated higher on the search list. And a lot of it has to do with
Awesome,
how
thanks.
detailed you are in your description and then your reviews. So that's what will populate you higher, is if you have good reviews, you're quick to respond, it was clean, all of those things, right? And- What's that?
Promotion going on.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, exactly. And the dynamic pricing, that will definitely help too. Like, it'll suggest, and it's typically lower than maybe you might want, but it'll get you the people in your unit. So, yeah, so does that answer your question? Sorry, I got a bug. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your attention, and it was really a pleasure to be with you tonight. So, thank you.
I have a question for Jason, probably regarding this before we move further. So when you apply for a mortgage, and if short-term rental wanted a mortgage broker or a bank or whoever.
Yeah.
Private lender could be different variety of these things, but in the traditional mortgage wise, when you apply like for standard mortgage, as a, let's say, short-term rental to show the numbers.
Yeah.
And then you change your mind, maybe shortly after you get approved, because you just change your mind in general. Is it gonna cause a problem with the bank itself or by whatever
No.
standards?
So typically, most banks will start considering short-term rental income if you have a 2-year track record. So you can say, oh, the last 2 years I've averaged this amount. But even then, they're still going to be somewhat skeptical because rules change and all of a sudden bylaw comes in and it's no longer sustainable. So they will factor some income in 2 years. But if you change the use after the mortgage, it doesn't really matter. The mortgage is granted. It comes down to intent. If you intended to run it as a short-term rental and that was what you were after, then that's fine. If you change the use later, they're not going to have a problem with that. Or vice versa. You plan to run it as a long-term rental and then you start Airbnb it. That's not really the end of the world. If you intentionally deceive them, you tell them you're going to do one and then you go ahead and do the other one, that's technically mortgage fraud. But at the end of the day, there's not much they can do about it because all they could really do is call in the mortgage and they don't really want to do that. So keep making your payments and they're not going to worry too much about it. Same with even moving into a unit. Like if you're putting the 5% down and then you move into it is one of the terms of the mortgage and you don't move in. I know some people that have done that once upon a time, and the mortgage broker said, well, that's actually mortgage fraud, and said that they won't do any deals with them in the future, but there was actually no repercussions because charging them with mortgage fraud and collapsing the whole deal is a lot more than it's worth as long as you're still making the payments.
Is it a crack, like if you put 5% down as a first time home buyers and you move in, or you don't have to move in, and then you change kind of your mind by the numbers, depend on the market or your personal circumstances, whatever it can be. So if you move in, how long do you need to stay as your prime residential area?
You need to,
Airbnb?
so if you buy it and move into it, essentially you need to keep that as your primary residence until you have over 20% equity in that property. Because that's, if you're not living in it, you need 20% down. So if you've exceeded 20% equity, you pay down some mortgage and the property's increased in value, then you could essentially go and get another mortgage and buy a second property and you could put just 5% down on that one. That's fine. But they're not going to give you another mortgage to go buy a second property when you still only have 5% in this one, because if you only have 5% down on this one, that you can only have one primary residence with that 5%. Again, it depends what your intent was, but you would have to buy it with 5% down and then go rent somewhere else and Airbnb it, which again would be mortgage fraud. But if they don't know about it, it's not a crime, right? Is that how it works?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to say, like, living somewhere, even if you pay 20% down to buy another rental in this place and you want to rent out, you cannot just pay 5% down. You have to pay 20% down. At least that's what
Yes.
the task was.
Well,
so
it
far.
wouldn't be your first time home buyer while you already have one, and then you decide to buy another one. So it's only once in a lifetime.
Once in a
No, the
lifetime.
5% down could be continued as long as you have 20% in the original and you're planning to move into the next one. So I have a friend that
Yeah, if you're planning to move in.
yes, if you're planning, if you're buying a
Yeah.
strict rental property
Yeah.
and you're not moving in, no matter what, you need 20% down. But if you bought the place with 5% down, the market went up and now you had 20% equity, you could buy a second place and move into it with 5% down. But you would require to have then that first property you bought would then be the investment that would have the 20% down and 5%.
Didn't work for us last time.
Well, I saw
No.
there's only one time when you are eligible for 5% down for your primary residence.
That first time home buyer and the 5% down are two different things.
Is that like a CMHC one?
Yeah, so it's a CMHC insured mortgage. Doesn't necessarily have to be a first time home buyer. That can be used kind of whenever, but it can only be used on a primary residence. It cannot be used on an investment
I
property.
thought it's only once, that's what I've been explaining before.
Should brokers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know somebody that did it 4 times, and on the 4th time, he didn't move into it. And that's when he got in trouble doing mortgage fraud. But nothing came of it, so.
No, I'm not intentionally going to do that. I'm just saying about it 5% only first time home buyers and it's only once. That's what I've been explaining.
Unless they've changed the rules in the last couple of years, I believe you can continue as long as you either are selling your first property or you have at least 20% equity in that property at that point in time. But again, yeah, different mortgage brokers might have different answers or different loopholes. Yeah, if there's a will, there's a way. I mean, lenders are getting stickier and stickier, right? So it is becoming more
So is
complicated.
that in BC or elsewhere in Canada?
Everything I know about was in BC, so I'm not sure what.
I did it in other provinces.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know if anyone has any other questions about yeah, short-term rentals or anything else that's going on.
I think the shed has one more. So.
Oh, there's some chat.
Oh, some chats on there.
Shed's going on.
Yeah, so Marcus says, I can see rates rising a bit, but 5-year fixed mortgages compressing as it becomes clear that we're not headed into the 5+% zone. I think eventually variable and fixed rate will match up closely again. Yeah, I agree on that, but not at the moment. Yeah, typically your variable and your fixed are a lot closer than they are right now. Depending on your liability, bank might need you to put 7, 10, or a little more sometimes. Yeah, so the 5% is not guaranteed. It depends on a number of factors. If the nice thing about the 5% down is they don't actually require an appraisal, which is ridiculous to me. And it helps actually get the qualifying. I know people that were trying to put 20% down and they couldn't get it. They couldn't get approval for the financing for it, so they put 19% down, went with an insured mortgage and got the lending, because the banks are obviously risk adverse. And so CMHC mortgages, and there's another one, CanSure, or there's another insurer that will insure mortgages. Basically, they're guaranteeing that if you default on that mortgage, the lender's getting their money back. So it usually comes with a higher interest rate, but sometimes putting 19% down can actually make the deal happen instead of putting over 20% down. And actually, sometimes I haven't checked recently, but you can actually get a lower interest rate with a CMHC insured mortgage, because again, it's less risk for the bank. But yeah, sometimes depending on the loan to value ratio, they might want 10% down or 15% down. The 5% is not guaranteed. That's the best case scenario. Yeah, I think that's all the questions on there. Yeah, anyone else have anything? Airbnb?
There is a Facebook group of the Nanaimo and Vancouver Island. If you guys want, it's hosted by Airbnb. I think it's Vancouver Island and Gulf Coast. If you'd like to join, yeah.
Okay.
Which is, it's a great resource for current events. I think I'm following what's happening in Seychelles because they have the bylaws, and the Parksville and Polycomb area is also following the suit.
Yeah.
So it's.
Can you say the answers group?
Vancouver Island and Gulf Coast, I think Airbnb group. But if you search Vancouver Island and Gulf Coast, it will appear.
Yeah, I think it's the short-term rental is definitely a way to generate that more cash flow. I would be cautious of buying properties that don't cash flow or at least break even as long-term rentals. If you find something that works as a long-term rental or breaks even, and then you want to run it as a short-term for that additional cash flow or profit, that's great. But as we've seen, bylaws can change. If you're in a strata complex, they could say that it's no longer allowed. And then if you're hemorrhaging money, you're forced to sell it. And if we are heading into a downturn and you're forced to sell it less than an ideal time, that's the risk, right? A friend of mine that has a number of Airbnbs in Prince George, all of a sudden COVID hit and all the cancellations just across the board. Now he's stuck flipping the mortgage on multiple properties. It all came back and he did fine, but there is some risk associated with there. So it's always nice to have it at least revenue neutral as a long-term rental. Yeah, that's key.
Right. Yeah. But in COVID, if you're an Airbnb, the government consider you a business, so they give you 60,000.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's true.
What was that? 60,000?
Yeah, the government you qualify. Yeah.
You qualify for what? Sorry, I didn't get that.
Yeah. So there's that. So definitely there's a market for it.
I didn't hear that. What did you?
Oh, they give you
That well.
So when you do Airbnb, the government considers you a small business, and small business is like the building blocks of our economy. So they give you 60,000, you qualify because you're part of the hospitality tourism.
You wanna say 1/6?
Well, no, you get-
60,000.
But you got to pay it,
60.
the majority of it back.
Yes, you can get 20,000 if you pay it in 3 years, 0% interest. Yeah, so,
I see what you mean.
so instead of you get like 5,000 a month, if you are like employee, the government gives you 60,000 if you are under a business.
Yeah,
So
so,
it's a loan.
It's
but
a grant.
you don't have
Grant
to,
and a loan.
you don't have to pay it all back.
You don't have to pay back, but the loan.
So
you have.
I originally it was 40,000 and it got increased to 60,000, right?
Yes,
So,
correct.
so yeah, I know like the $40,000 one, they gave you $40,000 and it was interest free for a certain period of time, but you were only obligated to have to pay back 30,000. You kept $10,000 yourself. So
That's through Airbnb, which is.
So is that a grant?
Just that.
The losses, is that like check or not? Like I'm lost for this.
well, if when COVID came out and they had to shut all these businesses down,
Right.
obviously everyone had expenses that were continuing and their income was cut off because of mandatory shutdown. So the government issued people check personally, or they were issuing businesses checks. And this was in the form of a $40,000 or $60,000 loan, some of which you had to pay back, or most of which you had to pay back, but a lot of it was interest free. The interesting thing about that, just the brokerage that I bought, the previous owner claimed the $40,000 benefit from the government. I took over. She had to pay 30,000 of it back. Essentially, I had to pay 30,000 of it back. She agreed to pay 30,000 of it back. She kept the $10,000. No issues there. I went to go get a credit card for the company because the company had declared the fact that they weren't financially viable and that needed to take this $40,000. The credit rating of the company was totally shot. So and many people didn't understand that. They thought it was a free cash handout, but it really affected your credit rating because you were basically saying, I'm going underwater, I need help from the government. And when you go to the bank and tell them that, they're not going to give you money.
Yeah, that's why they didn't take the money, but if you needed the money, literally people are doing they're getting 60 grand and they just put a different bank account for 40,000 or for like 4 or 5 months and just pay it back. And it's just literally 20,000 for free money.
Yep.
But if you're gonna expand your business or whatnot, it's become better.
Yes.
Have that.
It's yeah.
So does anybody has experience through COVID with Airbnb when nobody comes or goes or it's like stuck? Do you have an experience to rent it month to month for locals who need a place to live? Let's say they need to move out of their place for whatever reason and they need a place to rent another place for them to stay. And after COVID is over, you just take all of this months of COVID, like for 2 years or so, months to months in case circumstances haven't changed. And then you ask them to move out because you would like to continue Airbnb because it was Airbnb before you have these terms and conditions to rent it out while it was vacant.
Lots of people did that when that were doing short-term rentals when COVID hit. They panicked. They didn't know how long the shutdown was going to be. So they placed long-term tenants in there. When you place long-term tenants, and as tenants mentioned, there is actually in the rental agreement, it says the tenancy will be from this date to this date, and then will continue on month to month, or it will be from this date to this date and end at that date. The person has to move out, but then you have to put a reason why it has to end at that point in time. And that reason could be personal use. You're going to use it as a family, or your parents or your kids are moving in, but that's really the only valid reason you can give to kick a tenant out. If you're just saying, I want to kick you out to place short-term tenants in, that's not going to be accepted by the residential tenancy board.
But if it was short-term before COVID hit.
It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. This tenancy, if someone has entered into a residential tenancy agreement with you that's more than 30 days, you cannot kick them out for any reasons whatsoever aside from you, parents, or kids moving in. That's it.
But if I will move in, how long do I have to stay? Or
technically
if you
6
get
months.
months to months, and then you decide as an owner.
Technically, you need to move in for 6 months, and then you could go back to renting it as a short term. That does actually come down to, again, your intent. So if you moved in for 2 months and said, oh, now I've got a family member that's ill in Ontario and I need to leave, and it's only been 2 months and you move out and then you re-rent it, that would probably be acceptable. But even if you move in for 6 months, if it comes out that it was very intentionally just 6 months to get people out, tenants could possibly come after you and say that it was just a ploy to get me out, right? So once tenants are in there for more than 30 days, it's a residential tenancy agreement, and it's yourself, parents or kids, or renovations. But renovations now actually have to be applied through the residential tenancy board, and you have to prove that the renovations are required for the property for continue to be habitable, and the tenants can't stay there during the renovation. So there's like major mold issues, they can't stay there, they have to go out, the water and the power is going to be off for a week or two, they have to go, you have to apply through the tenancy board, and it's a bit of a procedure now.
But if you will have an agreement like 30 days under Airbnb and still rent it out as Airbnb, but on a mid-term as a 30 days with the Airbnb rate, but a bit lower because of special promotion.
Yeah.
Can you still do that and then get
So
out of these tenants?
That's one thing. Typically, if you're renting it for 30 days and you're doing it fully furnished and you're charging a premium for rent, so this unit would rent for $2,000 a month typically, but you're charging $3,500 a month because it's a 30-day short-term rental and it's fully furnished, includes internet. Well, if they stay after the 30 days, if they stay for another month, it's going to be at $3,500. Do you care? Isn't that the point?
If you have another guest already coming to stay.
Yeah, for sure. But if they're booking it for an extended period of time and they want to stay and continue to pay that, and there is not bookings coming up afterwards, then that's your intent all along, is to make that money, unless you're renting it semi-short term or medium term through the winter month, and then you really want to do nightly through the summer months, and that's when you would have that issue. So yeah, it is a bit of an issue. If they've been in there for more than 30 days, you have to really rely on them actually moving out. And if they don't, it's an issue. But if you have a company that's renting it to house employees, that's not what they're there for, right? So they're very likely to actually move out. It's when somebody is desperate for housing and they have to pay because there's nothing else available, they move in, and then they just say, no, I'm not moving out. That's
so
the
the
problem.
thing is, because when you turn from Airbnb to a long-term rental to somebody's, and you have to take your furnished and all the decor out as Airbnb and let them to move furniture. But if you still rent it as a kind of mid-term rental with your furniture and the same decor as Airbnb, you're not changing anything, you just kind of let them rent 30 days and then reevaluate and get another 30 days just to be nice and let them stay there with your stuff in it, and it still will be continuous Airbnb, just in a different time frame and the rate with a different agreement under Airbnb to protect yourself as a business owner, and them to kind of know and be noticeable that you are staying under Airbnb just with a little bit of discount because it's less, let's say, whatever maintenance like cleaners and other stuff that expenses is me for the owner. So you kind of discuss this under whatever.
The problem is, it's going to come down to the tenant. If they, at the end of their 30 days, they don't move out, your recourse is through the Residential Tenancy Act. And the Residential Tenancy Act is not friendly to landlords, and it's going to take you a very long time to get that person out. Even if it's decided that you're in the right and they say this was a short-term rental, it's all acceptable, you have to get out, it's going to be a 2 or 3 month process to prove that. In the meantime, they're still going to be in there. It's always a risk. And the Residential Tenancy Act is going to say, well, if it was longer than 30 days, it's a Residential Tenancy Act. That's all there is to it. It's not a short-term rental. That's falls under the Residential Tenancy Act. And if you say, well, no, it was a short-term rental, they'll say, well, do you have a license? Is this being run as a short-term rental? Are you living in the residence? So you're going to be kind of trying to play both sides, and you're going to lose on both sides. So it's a risk. If you're doing more than 30 days, you're always going to be at risk of the tenant not moving out. And hopefully they understand and they're going to move on. But if they don't, if they know their rights and they're playing the game, you're going to be stuck with them. But you'll hopefully be stuck with them at the rates that you were charging, the high rates that you were charging because it's fully furnished, right?
So question, what if, like we keep saying, if it's a principal residence, what if it's 2 separate buildings on the same lot, like a house and a carriage house? So you live in the house, the carriage house is the rental.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So-
that would be fine, as long as you're living in one of the units.
Right, okay.
Yeah, then you'd be able to short-term the other one for sure, yeah, yeah. That's, yeah, carriage houses are considered basement suites essentially, they're viewed the same way, yeah, yeah. All right, is there any-
You don't want to mess with the rental tenancy.
No, that's one of the advantages of short-term is you're not doing the whole,
Trust us.
yeah.
There's also a group called BC landlords, and these are all like horror stories. Not to scare you, but that would like steer you away from. One of my friends actually is doing is 29 days on a short-term rental, and then one day is general cleaning, book them a hotel, and do it again and repeat.
Oh, okay, yeah, so then they're actually moving out, yeah, that's a clever way, yeah, that's a good one.
And so it's the same tenant though, the same.
Yeah, so just like 29 days, you restrict your short-term rental, one day is general cleaning, and then book them in a hotel, and then repeat and rinse, repeat.
The same person or different
Yes,
guys? So that really comes down to your reasonable guess, right? Like if you
Right.
get somebody like that, they're probably not gonna take you to the residential tenancy branch.
So there's creative ways.
Yeah.
They're very stingy with the 30 days.
It's really questionable whether you can trigger tenancy.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
but we know, it's a 30 days.
And one thing, Mike Porter, he on here just posted, he has a number of properties where he runs them as student housing. So they're longer than 30 days. They're quite often for 10 months through the term of school. And he's saying it's kind of a bit of a gray area right now as far as student housing, because is that residential tenancy or is that kind of a fully furnished student housing scenario? So a lot of times that doesn't fall under the Residential Tenancy Act, because they're renting a room, they're not renting an entire thing. So there's a shared accommodation. So that could even be a technically
That's right.
yeah, a loophole. And I don't know, as far as maybe like as far as like bachelor suites and stuff that aren't, they'd be almost viewed more as a room in a house more so than its own unit. Like, does that come into play when it comes to compliance with Nanaimo or any other municipalities?
So your question is if there's a bachelor suite, like in a basement or something for a main property,
Yeah.
is it viewed as a rooming house or is it viewed as a
Well,
rental unit?
If, like, I'm assuming,
You're right though. If you're renting like rooms in your house, you're in the principal house and you're renting rooms, that does not fall under the landlord tenancy.
no, as long as it's, what's it, 5 people or less.
Yes.
Otherwise, you get into
Limit.
rooming house category, which it requires a different zoning.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering, like, the Nanaimo was obviously trying to cut down on short-term rentals to provide long-term rentals.
Yeah.
But if it's a bachelor suite or you're renting a room in a house, it's not going to be rented as a long-term rental. So,
A bachelor suite could be.
Yeah.
okay,
It's got a
so,
kitchen
yeah,
and a
yeah,
bathroom.
yeah.
Self-contained
Yeah.
because it's a
Yeah.
kitchen
Yeah.
bathroom, yeah. So just like a large bedroom,
Yeah.
maybe where they have a bit of a living space or desk and all
Yeah.
that.
There's lots of apartments that are bachelors, they don't have a separate bedroom. that are-
But do they have a stove? Isn't that,
Yeah.
that's usually the cutoff, is a stove. Yeah.
Because you can have a
and
wet
they-
bar.
when they take out a suite,
Yeah.
they come and they cut the power for the stove. That's
Right.
the definitive. So quite often a bachelor suite won't have a stove, right? It might have a toaster oven or something. I'm just wondering, yeah, and in that scenario, you'd still have to live, I guess, in the house,
Yes.
even if you were doing
Yeah.
it as a short term. Yeah.
Yeah, in Nanaimo anyways.
Yeah.
It's a challenge because the way the rules are, the bylaws are being made, there's gonna be a gap there for the actual short term, right? It's kind of like they've sliced it out, so there's gonna be a missing hole for the actual short term, right? So some of these gray areas where it's like, well, is this really gonna be helpful to fill in the long term rental market? But
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's just kind of.
So how is student housing going to fall into that? Like, if you're renting a house out to students, if that's considered short term or is considered not doesn't fall
It's
under the
not, it's not
residential tenancy,
It's-
but now does that trigger that you have to live there?
That's a good question.
question.
They have, from what I've read, they haven't said anything specific to student housing.
So that might be the
Yeah.
loophole, rent
Yeah.
here. And honestly, like, I know a couple of companies out there that are doing the student housing thing, and they're talking about $1,200 a bedroom. per month.
Yeah.
So if you found a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house with 1 kitchen and you stick 4 students in there, you could be looking at $5,000 a month, right?
And it's not even students, it's
But your insurance would go up though. too.
Yeah, so
Your insurance would go up.
Yeah, for sure,
Student
yeah.
housing, I've talked to a couple who are working for the VIU and in the student housing program, and they say you run out of your money. It's hard to get students to pay.
Yeah.
Right?
And then they leave,
Yeah.
they're gone.
Yeah, so they have issues with them and that turned us off, student housing totally. And besides that, your insurance provider, there's many out there that don't cover more than 4 or 3 unrelated. People to each other.
Then it's a rooming house,
So,
yeah.
right, so it's tough.
Yeah.
We just say.
I actually never been attracted to student rentals for different reasons.
Yeah.
Jason, there was a, in the news just recently, there was a landlord company in, I think it was either Surrey or Richmond, that has recently lost a court case, but they were actually doing fraudulent stuff. So they were using the wrong tenancy agreements in order to get around the Tenancy Act, or trying to. They're using it, what is it travel agreement or something, where it was actually, a travel lease where it was actually long-term. But what it boiled down to is the question the court asked was the tenants, was it their primary residence? And if it was, then tenancy was involved.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, there were some cases where it was obvious that the landlord got the tenants to get hydro in their name. Well, obvious, right?
Yeah.
You know, things like that. But even in the case where there was no damage to closet, there was no utilities in the tenant's name, if the answer to that question, is this the tenant's primary residence, then they were treated as it was tenants.
Yeah.
With students, a lot of times the primary residence is still their mom and dad.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, when you're the landlord and they're the tenant and you're going before the residential tenancy board, you're gonna have an uphill battle. That's all there is to it. It is gonna fall to the default benefit of the tenant unless you can. That's, yeah.
See, even with Airbnb, typically, that model is targeted as not being your primary residence, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's, always ask yourself that question.
Yeah.
Is it this person's primary residence?
Yeah.
I would like to say, as managing long-term rentals for 7 years, I've only had 2 tenants that have been issues with the residential tenancy branch. So I would say that far beyond the majority of tenants are very manageable in terms of long-term.
And it's all about screening ahead of time.
Exactly.
Yeah. You're not supposed to go on social media and check your tenants out, but if they're openly posting photos, right?
Yeah.
You see how they live. So I mean, so I can't complain. You're like the only problem we have that was one tenant flooded our apartment, and that's a whole thing. That was even bad, but it always will.
Yeah. I've had good luck with long-term tenants and screening them is key. And luckily with the vacancy rate being 0, you get 20 applicants, it's pretty easy to find a good one, right?
And a lot of people, because of that desperation, don't want to lose their place, right? So a lot of times you get the chance to find people that are, I'm taking care of this because I don't.
I think a lot of times there's a problem either because of screening or because of not being as hands-on as is needed as either an owner or a manager. So if you set that precedent that you're around, you're gonna come and inspect their property, you're gonna make sure that things are taken care of, mowing the lawns, then.
Because there's a reason for us to go on to the
Oh,
property and have a look at.
Yeah. Except you have to mow the lawns, so.
Mowing the lawns. It sucks, but we do.
Yeah.
If you're considering buying a short-term rental, having a knowledgeable real estate agent and knowing that hey, this is content, because there's maybe 90% that are not Airbnb friendly. So be having fun with your real estate agent is simple.
Yeah, it's very hard to search. When it's a strata, it's very hard to search for short-term rental. So you can usually search if it allows rentals, but that doesn't necessarily mean, so you actually have to go through every single listing. And sometimes the agent will put in there right away, it does or doesn't allow short-term rentals, but if not, now you're reading through all of the bylaws to try to find it. So it is unfortunately a difficult thing to search for. It is time consuming to try to
That
spot
being
them.
said, I think the majority of stratas do not allow short term.
Agreed,
So
yeah,
it's kind of a, if you're looking
yeah.
at condos and stratas.
The other
don't
thing
Yeah.
in Victoria, there's areas that were zoned transient housing from, I think it was back maybe in like Expo 86 or something anyhow, which default allowed short-term rentals. And the city caught up wind of this when everyone, I don't know, 5 years ago when Airbnb started becoming popular. And so they came in and said, well, we don't want this. So they grandfathered any building that currently had short-term rentals. They continued them, they allowed them to continue, even not just a particular unit in that building, but the whole building. And any buildings that didn't have a short-term rental, they said they can never have short-term rentals. Now, what you're encountering is everybody buying condos in those buildings are all running them as short-term rentals. So I don't know necessarily if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but you have to consider that that's changing the entire demographic of that building. And maybe that those buildings are being devalued because homeowners don't want to live in a hotel. So you things like that can have pretty drastic changes, even though it's just one bylaw
One
change.
issue for us is like, if you're in short-term rental, then you should pay higher condo fee. Because we're here long-term, and so there's that issue.
Yeah.
So what I've been seeing, Victoria is the opposite, though, it's higher for short-term rental. There are only 6 buildings that allow it.
Right, yeah, so that's the other thing, maybe those are gonna go up and up more in value, yeah.
It's about 100,000 more to get.
Is that right? Okay, wow,
I
yeah,
think there's one in Nanaimo only, the Stewart, which is zoned as like hotel.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, lots of variables.